How do you design a garden that's low in maintenance, yet looks great and not like something in the car park at your local shopping centre? Well, in the next 10-15 minutes, I'm going to be discussing my top 10 tips on how I approach this and how you can spend less time kneeling among the weeds and more time sitting in the sunshine enjoying that garden of yours. Okay, I could be wrong, but I don't imagine anyone really enjoys weeding. But it's like a lot of unavoidable jobs within the garden. But what we can do is we can design our gardens in a way to reduce these unavoidable jobs so that they just don't take up so much of our time. And that way we can spend more time on the family barbecue or sitting in the sunshine enjoying that glass of wine in an evening. Now, before I go any further, I'm going to give you that talk that I give to most of my garden clients, and that is that no garden is going to look good and be no maintenance. There's always going to be something to do. But after running a landscaping business here in the UK for almost 14 years now and maintaining gardens of over 100 clients, we've managed to pick up quite a few ideas along the way so that we can reduce the maintenance within the garden through some simple additions or alterations within the space at the design stage or even afterwards. These ideas can save you literally hours every week, so you can choose to do more of what you want to within your garden. Now, within the planting and flower beds area, there's clearly loads of different things that we can do, and I've got quite a few options there that I'm going to be talking about. But before we get to that point, we're going to be starting, as we would within the garden design, in the structural element, the hard landscaping. So if you really want to get onto planting, you can always fast forward this bit, but there's one last thing right at the end as well, which I'm going to wait till then to tell you about. Something that is often forgotten about that's neither hard landscaping nor soft landscaping, but equally takes up a large chunk of time. So within the hard landscaping side of things, I'm going to focus on three key elements to start with. The specification of materials, placing the right element in the right place within the garden, techniques or additives that can prolong the life or delay the maintenance need. Now, a lot of the choices and changes you can make within hard landscaping revolve around specification, so that's where I'm going to start. So when looking at paving, porcelain slabs with grouted joint are without a doubt the lowest maintenance option. Natural stone can look great, like this theme I designed here in 2020, but often absorb water. There's potential of staining, algae can get in and moss and lichen can root into the stone structure. Now we can easily remove this with certain chemicals and lots of maintenance, but we're here to talk about reducing maintenance. Block paving, clay pavers, they look great, but they tend to have sand-filled joints and attract weeds through self-seeding. And so porcelain, although it's not totally impermeable, isn't far off, and a simple jet wash twice a year is often enough depending on the location. So just like the old saying, the right plant for the right place, well, it's the right paving for the right location. So your hard landscaping needs to be thought about quite carefully, especially when it comes to location and the right elements in the right places. For example, you stick a patio underneath a tree and you're probably going to be pressure washing bird droppings off that patio at least once a week. A shady spot in a garden is going to attract a lot more algae, moss, lichen than perhaps an area that just achieves just a little bit of sunshine each day. These sorts of factors should be considered by us as designers when we're first looking at a garden and placing these elements within the space. And making sure that we carefully think about not just what looks great, but also what's going to save the client time in the long run. Now, that's not to say that you should never put a patio directly under a tree, but it's just one of those things that we just need to think about and consider, is there a better option for this? Budget is also something that needs to be considered too when thinking about specification and location of elements. Now, I love a gravel pathway regardless of budget. It can look great if it's edged with stone sets or clean corten steel, and is often a much more cost-effective option to paving. But gravel is the perfect place for weeds to set seed, and not only that, but you must specify a good membrane to go underneath the gravel. As a business, we use hardcore under our gravel pathways and then a geotextile membrane underneath that to make sure there's no chance of weeds coming from underneath. Then it really is about location, and again, if you probably don't want to put it under a tree. The tree's going to drop its leaves, maybe its berries or whatever, and again this is going to build up, and if not removed straight away, it's going to become quite unsightly and again increase the likelihood of weeds germinating from above. Gravel can, however, sometimes be a good choice for areas, especially where water might build up and otherwise cause paving to go very green. And it's also another option when trying to avoid a lawn, like in this low maintenance Japanese themed garden. So don't immediately discount it if you're trying to minimise your maintenance, as this can be a lower maintenance option than you think. Decking or timber structures, when used in the garden, often have a limited lifespan and can require quite a bit of maintenance. Now there are loads of composite products coming out all the time, and although these are a great option, lasting longer than timber and requiring very little in the way of maintenance, and sometimes looking great, they sometimes aren't quite right for the design, and I'm yet to see a good composite post that could make an arch or a frame that would come anything close to oak or a similar hardwood. And so as designers, we need to be a little bit more thoughtful and specify elements such as stainless steel feet for pergolas and archways that will then stop the timber rotting in the ground. Hardwoods are often last longer than softwoods. Oiling wood can sometimes benefit the lifespan and keep the colours really rich, but often this increases the maintenance as you have to then re-oil these quite regularly. I often tell my clients that it's better to go for a good quality hardwood than potentially a softwood where it needs to be painted or treated regularly. And with that hardwood, we can let that silver naturally. And this can be especially important when we have, for instance, climbing plants scrambling all over that timber. After all, if we need to oil it or paint it at a later stage, then we're going to have to carefully peel those plants away if possible. And even then, we might not get quite the finish that we're looking for. Now, when we look at the construction and specification of our projects, deck frames could be one as well that we want to think about when it's timber. In the UK, we have this product here called decking tape, which creates a breathable barrier over a softwood, which extends the life considerably. Alternatively, composite deck frames are something we're using more and more. Now, it might sound like I'm really going off down the landscape contractor route, but actually, as designers, this is really important, and we're there not only to make sure a garden looks good and works, but also how it's built as well. The specification is something that we can dictate to a certain extent, and our clients are going to really thank us if we start specifying elements such as decking tape, for instance, if it means that they're going to get better value in the long run and have less maintenance in the end. Okay, next we're looking at water features. This is a big one. So many of our clients want a water feature, and they often transform a garden from being fairly plain to a garden with a real wow factor. But when specifying and designing a water feature, there's some key elements we need to think about when it comes to ongoing maintenance. First, all water features need regular cleaning. They need to be drained and refilled at least every 6 months to every year. Unless, of course, we're getting into the realms of ponds, but this segment is really more aimed at ornamental water features. So thinking about this in advance is always helpful. And then back to position again. You know, in the autumn, is it going to fill up with leaves from the trees nearby and end up in a right mess at the end of every week? And if you have an open body of water, is that going to fill up with leaves or dirt or detritus from around and about? And how is that going to be dealt with? Now, I'm going to be doing a video all about water features very, very soon. It's an element of garden design that I absolutely love, probably one of my favourite parts of garden design. So do subscribe if you haven't already, so that you don't miss out on that one. The lowest maintenance water features often tend to have hidden reservoirs, such as a water blade or some sort of spout where the water falls into the pebbles or gravel covered pool. This tends to stop a lot of the leaves, etc. from going into the reservoir, and even when dirt and leaves do get in, they don't tend to be visible in the water when they come through. Clearly, it's a bit more work to get to the reservoir when you need to clean it or drain it, but the frequency of cleaning and draining and refilling can be greatly reduced this way. So when it comes to algae, you've really got two choices. You could use chemical treatment, which we use quite often. Most of the time using something like Fountain Clear, which simply raises the pH so nothing can grow in there, but bromine is also an option if delivered correctly at the right levels. However, if you have plants or even fish, then chemicals simply won't be suitable and we fall back to UV filtration. And if you think about this in advance, you can ensure the right size filter is specified and has a place where you can get to it and clean it out as required without it being too obvious. Otherwise, you're going to be constantly out there with a net cleaning it out, and that's never going to feel good. Okay, so I know some of you will be waiting for this expectantly or will have fast forwarded. So we're going to get straight into the planting and softer side of landscaping. Here we go. So within the soft side of landscaping, we're going to be looking at these key points. We're going to be looking at the lawn, and then the use of raised beds and pots, the right plant in the right place. I know I've said it before. The type of plants we're going to be using, mulches, and then finally irrigation. Okay, let's kick off with the lawn. So If you really want to reduce the maintenance of a garden and minimise it to the absolute max, then to be quite honest, you need to get rid of the lawn. However, if you're like me, you might have kids, or it might just be that there's a very large area within your garden that it's not really practical to have anything but a lawn. And so there are a few steps that we can take to try and reduce the maintenance when it comes to growing a lawn. Firstly, whenever I design a garden with a formal lawn, or even if it's quite a relaxed lawn, I like to specify the use of some sort of edging. Okay, so this is your standard sort of length of steel lawn edging, if you like. You can see the spikes. The idea is that we push this down into the ground. If you're doing this as an afterthought, it's sometimes worth just taking a half moon edger, for instance, and cutting a groove using a string line, and then using a rubber mallet and very carefully knocking that in. You'll notice that with this one you can connect either end so that you get a nice straight line. It's around about £8 to £10 a linear metre is that, so quite a cost-effective solution to maintenance. Occasionally we use mortar to secure this edging, like on this project where I knew there was a risk of movement. And then we backfill to one side with soil and then lay turf right up to it. And this is what it looks like when it's all in. As you can see, it's pretty minimal in its impact, and what it does is it means that you don't have to then use edging shears or a half moon edger to cut the lawn back every so often. And you don't have to use steel. If the design allows it, you could use paving as well. Okay, so here in the UK we have a bit of a movement going on that's been here for the last few years called No Mow May. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but the idea and the general concept is that you just don't mow your lawn for the month of May. The plan is that obviously this allows plants such as clover, for instance, to grow and flower within your lawn, the grass to get a little bit longer to create a better habitat for lots of insects and bees and things like that at a time when they're most active. And it's a great idea. However, I tried this last year, and if I'm honest, it wasn't ideal for us. I've got 2 young daughters, and they love to use the garden for their gymnastics practice. So lots of handstands, cartwheels, and the problem that I found was the amount of clover we've got on our lawn was great, but it did mean that there was quite a few casualties and stings to the hands and feet, which was rather nasty. Also, if I'm honest, when I got to June, my lawn was so long, my mower just did not stand a chance. I ended up having to trim the whole lawn, which was incredibly time consuming. So this idea of No Mow May is probably not a great way to reduce maintenance as a whole. However, what we have found that works really, really well is this year I've sectioned off around about 1/3 of the garden in these islands or pockets with pathways leading through them. And these sectioned off areas take up around about 1/4 of the lawn and leave those to grow for the summer, and then mow areas for the kids to play and walk through. As you can see, I've also allowed bluebells to naturalise in the area, which really adds to it. But if you really want a lawn and you don't like the idea of No Mow May or leaving certain areas to go wild, there are other options as well. So long as you've got a fairly sunny aspect, chamomile can be a really great option. This is quite drought tolerant too, so again, you don't need to mow it, but it's likely to stay greener in times of drought, so no need to get the sprinkler out. But it does need a certain amount of sunshine, and it's not ideal with heavy foot traffic, so it wouldn't really be suitable for us as a family. Next, raised beds and pots. We use these a lot. Raised beds can be used as structural elements and frame steps or other such structures. We've even used them to retain land. But as well as looking good and working well as part of the structural side of garden design, they also allow us to easily manage the soil type for planting. Weeds are far less likely to migrate to them from the neighbour's garden, and they're easier to access too if your client has any mobility issues, but still want plenty of flowering plants. So next I want to talk a little bit about types of plants. Now, if I'm honest, I'm cheating a little bit here because this is multiple points that I'm sectioning in just one, okay? But bear with me. Firstly, I would say it's about choosing plants that have a really good lifespan, you know. So plants that are going to give you potentially flowers in the spring, berries in the summer, maybe jet red leaves in the autumn. These are really, really good value. The difficulty when it comes to short-lived plants, so for example, a plant that might grow and then only flower for a week or two, is you've then got to think about cutting those back quite regularly, and also you probably really are going to have to think about other plants in and around it to give you interest for the rest of the year, a certain amount of succession planting. Now, spoiler alert, because that is going to be the topic of one of my talks very, very soon, so again, stay tuned for that one. But as well as getting the most bang for your buck when it comes to plants, we also need to think about making sure that our plants are going to thrive, and they're not going to need lots and lots of hand holding. Now, this can be something as simple as just making sure that the right plant is in the right place. And what I mean by that is, for instance, you don't want a plant that particularly needs like an acid soil. Let's think of a camellia or rhododendron, and putting that into a neutral soil, it's going to mean that you're going to have to add lots of ericaceous compost on a regular basis or some sort of additive to allow that to thrive. Tender plants as well, looking after those in the winter time might mean digging them up and putting them under glass, or it might mean fleecing. I have a couple of tree ferns at home. I absolutely love them. I have to fleece them every year, remove the fleece, have to monitor them. I don't mind doing that, but it is an extra maintenance element, Also, getting the right size plant in the right place. One of the problems I have with planting a lot of our gardens is when we first plant a garden is we don't want the flower beds to look too bare. So the client naturally wants lots and lots of plants within the bed. However, if we plant a plant that's too big for a location, let's say we've got half a metre square or a metre square, and we put something that's going to grow double the size of that, the difficulty is they're going to be constantly having to cut that back and prune it to make sure that it stays within its area and doesn't swamp the other plants. Choosing lower maintenance shrubs and even blocks of hedging, which often look quite contemporary, can mean a cutback once or twice a year. This very long, narrow driveway would have been quite boring if we'd just run the lawn up to it, yet hedging and these flowering Pyrus chanticleer gave great display throughout the year and also improved the safety of the space next to a driveway. Whereas a garden that's been planted in the theme of, for instance, a cottage garden, lots of perennials, bulbs, that's going to be cracking the whip every weekend, getting you back out to work in it. So why not mix it up a little bit? Have a multitude of shrubs and larger plants that need very little maintenance, with pockets and areas or even cottage style planting in between them. And then the types of plants can also include the use of ground cover specimens such as Vinca minor, Ajuga rectans, Pachysandra terminalis or Lamiums, just to name a few. These plants will not only fill the gaps that perhaps some of the larger plants leave and thus finish the scheme off well, but they'll also fill in all the gaps and reduce the amount of open soil. This is going to lead to fewer weeds self-seeding. Any weeds that are in the garden are going to have a bit more trouble in terms of competition. And it's also, when it comes to the hotter months, going to mean that there's less evaporation from the soil, which is also then going to lead to less time you're going to have to spend watering the garden. And that very neatly leads me on to the next topic, or the next point, which is mulching. Mulching the garden can really reduce the amount of time you need to spend in the garden, especially when it comes to a new garden where watering is going to be absolutely crucial in the hotter months. The mulches are going to reduce the amount of evaporation from the soil, and it's also going to reduce the amount of weeds within the soil as well, because not only is it going to suppress the weeds that are potentially going to be there, but also it's going to stop or certainly reduce the amount of weeds that self-seed within the flower beds. Bark is a common mulch here in the UK, and more recently straw in the form of a matted mulch which doesn't blow around as much as bark and gives a slightly more refined finish in my view. Gravel can also work well in doing this, although if you use gravel and you've got quite a few plants, don't be tempted to try and incorporate a membrane just under the gravel, as when you do and you have quite a few plants, the weeds often come through the cutouts anyway, and the membrane only ends up visible and doesn't really do much. And finally, well, almost finally, we get on to point number 9, which is irrigation. Manually watering a garden can be really time consuming. Unlike 2023 here in the UK, 2019 had quite a hot summer. We had a client who wanted a large amount of hedging putting in, so we planted this lovely new hedge in May. Soil was starting to warm up, everything was starting to develop. We offered to put in a drip pipe all the way down the hedge line so as to help him with the watering, but the client was adamant that he would be fine watering that and didn't need to spend the money on this. Fast forward a couple of months and 30 degrees, 3-4 weeks worth of no rain whatsoever, and we got a phone call from him. And he said that he was going out watering it every evening for at least an hour, and then he was starting to water it in the morning now, but the hedging plant was still struggling, it was still drooping a little bit, and he was really worried about it. So what we did was we went out, we fitted this weep hose, just wove it in between the hedge, and then had a connection that he could literally attach to the tap. What that meant was then, first thing in the morning when he got up, as he was making his cup of coffee, he could just turn on the tap, leave it until he was ready to go to work, turn it off again. Again, when he got in that evening, just turn the tap on, connect it back up, turn the tap on. After he's had his dinner, he could go out, have a walk around the garden, turn the tap off, job's done. You know, it saves all that time standing there with a hose pipe, which is not only time consuming, but quite frustrating when you see that it's still drooping. And it's not just hedging that needs that additional help, you know. Planting trees, often the first year is the most risky, so we need to be very, very careful with them then. But equally, they do take a lot longer than smaller shrubs to establish, and I would think at least 3 years those trees are particularly vulnerable. So by putting in an irrigation system, you're actually protecting your investment as well as reducing your maintenance. And a good perennial scheme is always going to need a little bit of help when it comes to hot, dry summers. And nothing that a sprinkler won't help with, perhaps at the end of the day when there's less chance of scorch, or maybe a fully integrated irrigation system. We've started adding automated irrigation with drip hoses that are connected to a timer and run around the beds, allowing you to set a water cycle and literally go away for as long as you like without worrying about anything drying out. That said, in 2023, I'm not sure how many of our clients think that investing in an irrigation system was good value for money, but hey, at least the gardens are looking good still in October. So final point, and the one that everyone often forgets about or is often an afterthought once the garden's complete, and that comes to furniture and accessories within the garden. Wooden tables and chairs often need oiling or protecting, or at least some sort of maintenance, you know. Cheap rattan furniture degrades within the sun. The choice of furniture you make can make a real difference to the time that you spend within your garden. Again, there are lots of composite options coming to the market, and at the moment, with waterproof cushions, these can allow you to uncover the furniture and leave it out from April until September with very little interference. Metal too, the options are pretty much endless. I remember a few years back I bought a teak table and chairs for our garden. We needed a new dining table and chairs, and I saw this one online. I thought it looked really good, and it did. It looked great. However, it did need oiling, so put the first coat of oil on, great, put another coat of oil, thought that's absolutely brilliant. But the following year, needed doing again. The difficulty with this is you need that dry, warm weekend where you can spend a whole day going through all the little slats and making sure that you get oil in all the right places. And then when you have a nice, warm, dry weekend, do you really want to be spending your time oiling furniture? I certainly didn't. So unfortunately, the table got neglected and after a few years started to deteriorate to the point where we had to get rid of it. As a designer, furniture specification is often a great after-sales as well for us as a business. It doesn't have to be, but again, being a good designer, you might decide that actually helping your client choose the furniture they're going to have within their garden is a really good service that you can offer as well. There's nothing worse than having a great garden that you've spent hours and hours and hours designing, and then they put some cheap furniture that they've bought off the internet that just lets the whole scheme down. And that's why I think furniture is the often forgotten or neglected but vital part of every garden when you come to designing it and living with a garden for low maintenance use. So as a quick recap, my top 10 tips to reduce maintenance in your garden. Specify the right materials in the beginning. Think carefully about where you site your seating areas and pathways within the garden. Use additional elements to prolong the life or delay the maintenance need, and reduce and edge your lawn. Use raised beds and pots. And the right plant in the right place will always help. Fill gaps in planting with ground cover plants, and use mulches to reduce watering and to suppress weeds. Install irrigation to help establish plants and trees in their first few summers. And don't forget to choose your furniture that doesn't require painting, oiling, and lasts well in all weathers. So if we keep these elements in mind, we can definitely produce a garden that not only looks great, but is relatively low maintenance and easy for your client or yourself to look after in the future. Now, I think there's always compromises to make. If we focus solely when we're designing the garden on how to make it as low maintenance as possible, we might miss an opportunity. You know, we might have a garden that looks really good but could have been really great if only we'd accepted that there was a little bit of work needed. Quite often I'll say to my clients, have they thought about maintenance? Not just because we offer maintenance, but also because sometimes with some of these jobs, you know, by going that extra mile and perhaps having somebody come in and do all the weeding, for instance, one day a week or something like that, just for an hour, that allows us the time to then maintain the other elements that we really wanted to put into the garden to make it give it. But as I say, if it's thought about from the outset, when it comes to maintenance, you don't need to slab over that yard or tarmac over that front garden just to keep it so that you don't have any work to do. And there we go. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you all for joining us. If you're here with me at this stage, I'm guessing you've probably already subscribed to the video, but if you have to the channel, sorry, but if you haven't, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Keep the comments coming as well. Loving some of those messages that I'm getting online. It's really good to hear from you, and obviously if there's any topics that you want me to cover in the future, please let me know. But thanks for listening.